time. Don't wait until the end, as this will give us an opportunity to manage your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. And given the number of attendees today, there will be many. We have over 200 of your colleagues on this call today. This webinar will last about 40 minutes in total and will be recorded and available at FindBiometrics.com. I would now like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their continuing support, BioConnect, ZKAccess, and a special thanks to Acuity Market Intelligence. And to start things off, on our discussions today, we are very fortunate to have with us none other than the industry's brightest, boldest, and best analyst and consultant, Maxine Most. Max is the principal of Acuity Market Intelligence, and I've known Max well for about 14 years, and she is known for providing original, thought-provoking, accurate, and reliable industry analysis. Basically, Max is the best in the business. Both Max and I speak at or attend most of the biometric conferences held every year around the world. Max will now be providing us with her latest thinking to kick things off. I am so pleased to introduce our presenter today, the mighty Maxine Most. Take it away, Max.
Well, thank you, Peter, and I do not pay him to talk about me like that, folks. I want to talk to you today a little bit about access control. And as Peter said, ISC West was it last week? It seems like perhaps it was maybe 2 weeks ago. Very interesting, and I think that what we're seeing now in the global access control market is very, very interesting. And the market it's a substantial market. We're talking about something on the order of 25 million enterprises globally, 150 million doors and 350 million employees. So it is really a significant opportunity. And the United States market is actually the largest regional market in this total marketplace, with about 5.6 million enterprises, which translates into, quote, 7.4 million establishments, end quote. That is a U.S. Census Bureau representation. And basically what that means is there are actually 7.4 million physical locations associated with these 5.6 million enterprises, 44 million doors, and 96 million employees. Again, a huge potential market. And what's interesting about the global access marketplace right now is the fundamental dynamics are changing. We're talking about a market that is not growing too terribly rapidly, but it's still significant nonetheless, close to $20 billion anticipated by 2020. And again, the U.S. is 35-40% of this market, depending on how you calculate it. What's interesting is that there's the fundamental dynamics of the global access control market are changing. And we're talking about a market that today has about 655 million cards annually that are associated with it. And the vast majority of these are still dumb cards, about 30% are smart. But what's really interesting is if you look at this ecosystem, the latest survey results indicate that only about 6% of the deployments include biometrics. So while we've been talking about biometrics for access control for, more than a decade, 15 years, even beyond, we're still not seeing the kind of uptake that we would hope, even in cases where we've been able to demonstrate a real cost-benefit analysis in terms of integrating these systems and the capabilities that it provides for enterprises. So what's changing in the market today? What's changing in the market is the drivers are actually shifting the dynamics of the marketplace. We have a market where there are an extraordinary number of legacy systems that have been hanging around for 10, 15, even up to 20 years. And they just haven't been replaced. And now there is a certain amount of impetus to replace these, as well as, in many cases, financial resources to do so. We're seeing a profound shift in the integration of physical access control and logical access control. Again, something that we've been talking about in the biometrics industry for more than a decade, maybe close to 15 years. But we're really seeing that happen. And in fact, there was an entire section of the conference at ISC West and the trade show floor that was devoted to physical and logical integration. We're seeing, as in all markets, the transformative effect of mobility and wireless connectivity. And one of the things that is finally happening, again, something that's been talked about for a really long time, is the shift from traditional physical access control panels to network IP-based technology. And what's really interesting is, again, at ISC West, I was in a booth where they had one of these panels on display, and it really is kind of shocking in this day and age to look at the kind of base technology that is being used for physical access control. These old-style panels reminds me of, 70s telephone networking technology, and dumb cards, which is the majority of the marketplace. Another factor that's sort of changing the dynamics of the market is access control of as a service or managed access, where a lot of the process is happening as a hosted service in the cloud, as opposed to each individual enterprise having to manage their own system. And this is particularly important for smaller enterprises that don't have the staff and the resources to manage this kind of technology as we move from that more base sort of panel card scenario to a more complex, integrated technology kind of scenario. And fundamentally, and I know a lot of people will probably, I'll hear some gasps as I say this, the cards are obsolete. In the same way that we're now looking at digitizing everything from passports to driver's license to national ID cards, this idea that you're going to use a card, particularly a dumb card, to access, to provide secure access is really, it's an antiquated notion, and we really, as an industry, have to really help educate the marketplace so that people understand this. And this is really driving the why biometrics now and access control, because again, we've talked about this for well over a decade. So we have this wonderful consumer adoption transformation that is really paving the way for acceptance in the enterprise. And again, this is because we have 650 million smartphones out in the marketplace right now that have biometrics on them. We have something on the order of 200 models of smartphones that are available. So we are basically educating and acclimating a generation of consumers who in their other lives are enterprise employees to be able to use biometrics, to feel comfortable with biometrics, to just take them for granted. And that changes the game. And they've also become much more friendly and usable, not just on the smartphone, but if you look at the devices, at the evolution of devices at ISC West, you see devices that just remind you of technology that you're used to seeing. I saw a tablet with iris recognition hanging on the wall, and I didn't have to do the iris dance to get it to recognize, capture my eyes and recognize them. You see all kinds of, facial recognition technology. As you walk up to a device, you see touchless fingerprint scanners, and all of these new evolutions in technology are really making biometrics much more friendly and usable, and you don't have the experience of that you're adding some really kind of scary, unfamiliar technology into the workplace. The price points continue to drop. Performance continues to increase. As I said, you no longer have to align your face in a particular way or align your eyes in a particular way to get it to capture your facial image or your iris image. Or again, you can use these touchless scanners for fingerprints. There's all these new ways of interacting with the technology that makes it much easier. It's also becoming much more easy to integrate. That the industry has evolved to the point where we're now able to create a single interface to access both the traditional access control systems and the biometric data management systems. And this is critical because having to manage a dual system just adds a layer of complexity that many organizations are not comfortable with and don't have the resources to handle. And this notion sort of that identity-centric security has now become the way we think about security. It's a mainstream idea that we need to link our identities to our access, not just a token or a secret.
Max, before we leave this particular slide, can I I just ask a quick question about the timing of all of this?
Sure, absolutely.
Given the fact that the mobile side is moving so quickly, will this area catch up?
I think we're going to see rapid development in this market. Now, granted, the access control market is an old line industry, so it tends to move slowly. But I think what we're going to see, for the first time, really in a significant and broad way, is the customers in this marketplace are going to be pulling the solutions providers in this marketplace to adopt biometrics. I think because of this mainstream consumer adoption, because of the familiarity, because of this sort of demystifying and myth debunking around biometrics, that we're going to see accelerated movement because it's just going to be easier to do, and we're going to see a whole classes of industry customers that are saying, we want biometrics now. We are shifting to a more identity-centric management system. And particularly if they're looking at it on the logical access too, they're going to say, why do I need to have two systems? Why do I have to manage this whole identity problem in two distinct ways? I should be able to allocate access to physical, to facilities, to rooms within facilities, to devices, in the same way that I do to computer networks, to computer systems, and to applications that I'm providing to my, both internally to my employees, but also externally to my partners and my customers.
Thanks, Max.
So I have to say, this is a concept that I stole from my good friend Rob Douglas, who's going to be answering questions in a few minutes. This notion of approximations of identity, and I do that. I love to appropriate really good ideas from other people. I always try to give them credit, but I do the appropriation. So right now we live in a world where we have all these approximations of identity, and we're using these things for access control. And it's really kind of silly because it doesn't really provide the kind of security. It's sort of a feel-good security as opposed to an actual security, because you don't really know who has these things. And the idea is, if you use biometrics, you incorporate a biometric, you are then linking that access to a unique identity. And what does this look like in the world? Well, what it looked like at ISC West was everybody was talking about virtual credentials. And what they mean is mimicking these physical tokens, if you will, in the mobile device. So that what we see is sort of a mimic, a reflection, even a duplication in some sense of the credentials within the mobile device. But eventually where this is going is that all of these tokens are going to turn into concepts, essentially, that live inside of our digital device, that are truly virtual, and that are accessed through biometrics, and both using the mobile phone itself as a token, where you're actually using the biometric capture capabilities of that mobile device, or linked into a system where sometimes you actually have to use a reader on the wall to verify the biometrics. So it's going to be a complex ecosystem of how your mobile device, these virtualized tokens, if you will, are connected to the biometrics capabilities of that device, as well as external readers. And so what does this really mean for enterprise access control, right? What happens is we add the concept of mobility, right? And so, as I said, you're going to have these different mobile devices that are going to be biometrics capable. And, this is true for both physical access and also for logical access, which may be a direct connection. You may be going through a cloud infrastructure to access the logical capabilities of the enterprise. You may be using local authentication or server-based authentication. And in the enterprise, we're also talking about not just readers on the wall that will capture biometrics, right? But access to all of these other devices and physical, I should say, machines or vehicles that are connected through this web that we call the Internet of Things. So in other words, we're going to talk about a comprehensive notion of access, both physical and logical, to all of the resources within an enterprise. And what this does is it really dramatically transforms the role of biometrics, because it's not just, okay, can I get into a building? Can I access an application on the computer? But all these different devices that in some cases require regulatory management of data in terms of who's logging in or who's accessing these devices. Does somebody have the right credential to access the device in terms of a certification? So it's a much more complicated web, and this is why I think as these different modes of management of staff and facilities and objects come together, that we're going to have a much greater need for this kind of identity-centric access, which really links individuals to all of their actions within the enterprise.
Well, Max, thank you very much for that overview. Excellent work. Really appreciate your thoughts on all of that. And now I'd like to introduce our other panelists today. Joining us from my hometown, Toronto, Rob Douglas, CEO and founder of BioConnect. And our second panelist is Larry Reed, CEO, ZKAccess, who is joining us from his head office in New Jersey. Welcome, gentlemen. And I'm going to jump right into the first question. All over the global biometric industry and in the various verticals, I'm seeing a trend toward multimodal biometric solutions. The idea seems to be that the users and the specific use cases are going to dictate which modality is used. Is this the same in physical access and enterprise markets? What are some of the examples of workplace scenarios that would be best served by a multimodal solution? And Rob, can I ask you to start off on this one, please?
Yes, I can, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those joining. I would just offer a couple of comments. I've only been in this industry for about 14 years, so I'm still learning. But one of the things when I look historically is as manufacturers, we've looked to try to put multimodal into physical devices that get screwed on the walls to get used by people getting access to buildings. And we've been attempting to do that for quite a few years. I think actually the truth is for today out into the future, that's not really the solution for multimodal. That in fact, the future is really a view of BYOI, which is the employee who's also a consumer is going to be bringing your own identity, and that the enterprise is going to need to be able to put a platform in place to be able to deal with all of these identities. And those identities could be occurring, as Max was describing, on physical devices that are providing access control to buildings, or IIoT applications, or they could be on mobile devices, and soon to be, they could be on your biometric-based wearables. So two use cases that I would cite just as examples of this future of BYOI, or bring your own identity. One is in a data center or co-location facility where the perimeter of the facility may be using one type of biometric in order to get access to the facility, but the customers who are users of, let's say, a co-location facility who are operating in their individual rooms or on their individual racks where they're controlling their own specific data, they may be using a different biometric type, which again could be provided on the physical racks themselves, coming to us through mobile devices or through wearables. So that would be one use case. Another use case could be in a very high volume area where there's a lot of people moving in and out of a facility, where you're using like a passive biometric in order to enter large volumes of people into a facility, like maybe a facial recognition system where the user can just pass through a turnstile and it's doing the verification without the user having to do anything. And then as they're inside the facility, a step-up biometric, where now a different biometric is being used proactively in order to verify identity before they can be granted access to something deeper inside the enterprise or access to logical applications.
Thanks very much, Rob. Larry, can I get your take on this one?
Yeah, sure. As Rob mentioned before, with all these multi-modals, you don't even necessarily have control over what the guest will be using once they access the building. And so that's why it really goes on the integrator. In years past, really when you step backwards for a moment, this is almost like a repeat of the late 1990s and early 2000s when the internet became new. And the people driving those these business decisions. They were the end users, but they really lacked knowledge. So they rested on the laurels of the integrators who had the expertise. And unfortunately, in any business application, there's the end user looking to have benefits and cost reductions, but the integrator also is looking at their revenue, their comfort level, and a lot of the times the integrators won't adopt new technology because it requires a new learning curve from their perspective. So a lot of the times the integrators aren't really promoting all this forward-thinking advanced technology unless they're wanting to differentiate themselves. Now, if you look at the global market, in the United States actually, and in Europe, biometrics seems to have slower adoption rates than in other seemingly lesser developed countries throughout the world. Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And you have to ask yourself, as an American or as a European, why are these other countries who are seemingly less developed than the United States so much more advanced in the use of technology? And that's because, honestly, the cost of change and the integrators are pretty much wanting to stay within their comfort level. But now, with the popularity of all these smartphones, Rob mentioned all these different types of technology, the end users now are aware of this technology. They're learning about it, and now they're demanding that the integrators step up. So it's going to be very exciting the next few years looking at all these multi-modals of authentication utilized. And as Rob also pointed out quite eloquently, maybe the outer perimeter perhaps isn't need to be as secure as perhaps inner layers within the building. And so you could have layers upon layers of security, which is really where you want to protect your environment, because you want to pose as little inconvenience as possible on the perimeter and then secure the inner circle of your infrastructure where your critical assets are. So, Rob was spot on. The end users are now driving the demand for all these different types of multimodals of access, and the integrators better be up to speed on all the technology that are capable and has to pull this technology around, because in the end user does drive this market. So, Rob, thank you for your comments. I always learn, Peter, by the way, whenever I speak with you, Rob, and it's a wonderful opportunity for myself to learn as well. Like Rob, I'm also a rookie. I've only been at this for 10 years myself. So we're always learning as we're
Thanks, Larry. Max, do you have anything to add to this one?
I think they covered it pretty well. I do think it's interesting, as Larry picked up on, that this idea that the integrators can continue to be an obstacle in the path of this technology evolution, that position is just no longer tenable. And I think there's radical change coming in the configuration of the industry, because those organizations that are providing IT-based expertise in integrating physical and logical access are going to, I think, ultimately dominate this marketplace, and become the old miners that are hanging on to dumb cards and wagon are going to basically be the dinosaurs.
Well, and it's interesting when you attend some of the mobility shows or the fintech shows, and you see the speed of change that's occurring there. 1 year is just light years, it seems. And so, all industries, I think, whether they be automotive, physical access, healthcare, are going to have to start to echo the speed that the other leading industries are starting to move at. Now, I'm going to go to our next question. At ISC West a couple of weeks ago, virtual badge technology was all over the exhibition floor, in which mobile devices are being leveraged as contactless key cards. A lot of these solutions don't yet integrate biometrics, sort of what we've been talking about. Do you see this changing as biometrics on smartphones are becoming more common? And Larry, could I ask you to start this one off, please?
Yeah, sure, Peter. No doubt. You look around and the popularity and convenience of mobile phones and mobile computing, it's inarguable. It's all around us. And likewise, you see how dependent people have become on their phones today. And even my last 3 recent product introductions, before the customer even asked me what the features were of the product, they immediately were asking me, "Oh, is there a mobile app for that?" And I'm kind of wondering how people even still today toast bread without a mobile application. But they ask based on what they see and what they're accustomed to. So we talked about it before. Now that the consumer now is becoming so comfortable with biometrics, now that it's on your cell phone, shame on any integrator who's still not comfortable promoting it, because I always shame any installers I meet that they need to at least become familiar with this technology, understand how to leverage it, understand in cases where it's really not best suited, and at least this way be intelligent, be able to provide a response to the consumers. So going around the show, again, the convenience of the phone is inarguable, but there are also two other considerations that you need to make. First and foremost, any business owner cannot force employees to bring in their personal assets like a cell phone for business applications, even just for building access. Even though smartphones are so prevalent around the world, there's so many areas in the world where people still can't afford smartphones. And what are they to do? And again, even in the United States, you still can't force people. A second concern using portable devices, of course, is security. Now, I only know what I see in the media, so I'm not trying to take a political stand, but there's a lot of controversy right now with Hillary Clinton and discussion of the email server that she had. And those proponents of Hillary will claim, well, the content wasn't of a top secret nature, or she was unaware, and what's the big deal? But it's not the content; it's the fact that an asset was installed outside the protected network. And that's what happens when you've got cell phones now. How do IT directors now ensure the security of these devices once they leave their network? And everything now that's IP addressable is now vulnerable to any hacker as soon as you fall outside the protected network. And no matter how much you secure your own office and your internal network, those cell phones out there, those are mobile devices, IP addressable, that can be hacked. So no question that the convenience and popularity of smartphones makes ease of access very attractive to the end user. But again, to the IT and security directors, I still believe that they're still going to have some concern and really have to figure out a way to lock these devices down. So it's always, we all know on the panel, everyone listening, there's always a trade-off between convenience and security. It's really a balance.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, and Max, can I ask you to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mobilization of credentials is inevitable. And I think it's, as I mentioned, I think it's going to transfer to driver's license, passport, every kind of credential we have. The idea that we're going to carry physical tokens around that have chips in them when we have this, device in our hand, this amazing computing power in our hand, more computing power than was used to send men to the moon in 1969, is ridiculous. And I to Larry's point, there are many obstacles that will have to be overcome, not just in terms of, how does the enterprise manage this, but, how do we secure multiple credentials within a single mobile device, that have multiple secure features, and, how do you create an environment in that mobile device to do that? But I'm a firm believer that those kind of technologies.
Max, can I interrupt for a second? Do you remember Dr. John Halumka from the Harvard Medical School talking about this about 4 years ago when he had a gathering in Tampa there? He was talking about this exact thing. I think his quote was, "I've got 5,000 mobile devices and I don't control a single one of them."
Right. So it's not a trivial problem to solve, but it's a problem we're going to have to solve because it's inevitable. Right? It's just inevitable. And so the question is, how does that happen, and what is the path to that transformation? But I think the transformation is inevitable, and I think we'll see it in fits and starts and little bits and pieces over the next few years.
Rob? Hey, Peter? Yep. I'm may be hijacking this question, but I actually would like to comment to this, if that would be all right.
Your turn.
Is that Larry made a comment that I just wanted to build on, actually, is that, so this idea of virtualized credentials on your mobile phone makes enormous sense, right? I mean, it's like the black hole of everything, all applications that are finding their way onto smartphones. But one of the biggest inhibitors actually is the delivery mechanism of these systems, which right now the virtual credentials on mobile phones, the amount of sales volume coming for them is actually relatively small. It seems to make enormous sense, and yet the volume is small. And part of the reason is it's the systems integrators themselves. So the systems integration, so there's about 165,000 systems integration firms, security firms across the U.S., and a huge percentage of them are very comfortable with, traditional solutions to access control for the enterprise. So a solution like this is met with a great deal of skepticism. And I'll give you a live example of this. Last week when I was in the ISC event, I was actually talking to a systems integrator who was commenting about, I'm really not sure whether I want to get into biometrics and whether this is really, useful. And then we started talking about a mobile credential. He said, I'm not so sure there's really going to be a good market for this. I don't know if it's secure and so on. And when we finished the conversation, I said, oh, could I have your badge now? I'd like to scan you in our booth. And what did I pull out? I pulled out my mobile phone and scanned him. Every prior year, I had a physical device that the show floor gave us to do a physical scan of these people, and not anymore. It's actually just built into as an app on my phone. So the idea of using virtual credentials, which needs to tie in with biometrics to get to rightful identity, seems enormously correct. But boy, the end user is going to have to play a big role because people delivering these solutions are really a bottleneck.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm going to move on to the next question now. As the Internet of Things continues to expand, are you seeing new opportunities for biometric integrations in the workplace? What are some of the more innovative ways biometrics are being leveraged in the enterprise now that everything is connected? And Max, you started to reference some of this in your presentation. Could I ask you to start off on this one, please?
Sure. One of the things that I think is so fascinating about IoT is that, my first reaction to IoT and biometrics is okay, fine, there's going to be certain devices. And Rob has one device in particular he loves to talk about, which is a bailer. And maybe he'll chime in on that in a minute. But there are devices where you're actually going to have to worry about biometric access to the device. And the devices are so sensitive or dangerous or require training or, where there's, chemicals or you're doing medical research on viruses or, something really horrible that could be really dangerous, and you want to make sure that the physical access to that particular connected device is controlled. But what I think is also very, very interesting about IoT is that there's reams and reams and reams of data that these devices are going to generate, that all of these connected devices generate. And all of a sudden, it's not just the device you have to worry about, it's all the data that's being generated, where that data is stored, how access is managed to that data. And for individuals, or in the case of an enterprise, that could be very critical data to the functioning of the enterprise. It could be, critical intellectual property. There's all kinds of information. So I think the problem is larger than just the physical access in that sense, and the logical access to the volumes of data that's created become, really, really important. And how that is managed in an identity-centric model, I think is going to be really critical moving forward as this concept of the network extends to everything. And, talking about John Alanka, I remember John also, who happens to be the Chief Technology Officer at the Harvard Medical School. And he was talking about, a device that they had, which is some kind of a scanning X-ray device, which, you think about it, it's like a toaster, right? It's a device that exists inside this facility and it does something specific. But when the technician came to update the device, he had to connect it to the network to add software to it. And when the technician forgot to disconnect from the network, all of a sudden, all the data that device had been generating, personal information about patients, all of their health data, was exposed to anybody. And this, I think, is the kind of thing that we're really going to have to think about, going forward with IoT.
Thanks. Rob, can I ask you to weigh in on this, please?
Sure. So I would call it the IIoT, which is the Industrial Internet of Things. There's a lot of activity around this. I think the commercialization of this sort of market segment has still yet to fully flush itself out. But I'll give you a couple of use cases. Is that wherever a dumb piece of hardware needs identity, that's where everybody on this phone has a role to play. And I'll give you two use cases. So one use case is an EMS vehicle. So what's inside of an EMS vehicle? Well, they have safes that are protecting narcotics. So if a patient who's being rushed to the hospital needs access to those narcotics, there has to be authorized access to that safe in that EMS vehicle. Well, in yesterday's world, how do you get into it? Well, it's a key, or maybe it's a card, which means anybody can actually get access to those narcotics. And what you see examples of happening right now, I've witnessed this through one of our partners, is when you now bring biometrics and now connect that to those dumb pieces of hardware and make them now internet capable safes, you are now being able to effectively and transparently manage the rightful identity of who is getting access to those narcotics and have a very good audit trail of access to it. So that would be one use case. And the other use case, and by the way, there's tons of them. Another use case is the one that Max mentioned, which is we had a customer about 3 years ago send us this video, and I love this video because he took his trash compactors, which are, they call them balers, in the back of retail stores that crush cardboard boxes, and he put our biometrics on them. And the reason why he did it is that they have like you either press a green button to operate it or a red button to turn it off. And under OSHA compliance across the U.S., you have to be 18 years of age or older to operate this thing by law. And he put a biometric onto this baler for the purpose of verification of rightful identity before they were able to operate it. And the reason why that's the case is these particular items are statistically more likely to kill you and crush you than they are to dismember you. So it's a fairly significant health and safety issue, which is why OSHA puts a hard line on this. So those would be probably two examples of many, many examples as dumb pieces of hardware now join the internet, and then we as an industry can play a role in bringing identity to that internet-based hardware.
Thank you very much, Larry.
Yeah, and Rob brought some excellent points. And just to take it one step higher, no doubt that biometrics can be used to safeguard those types of dangerous electrical equipment that Rob pointed out. There's OSHA violations and things of that nature. But you have to also understand that people have avoided biometrics in the past because they thought of it as very complex. But the use cases that Rob just described, the biometrics are simply being used as a switch, on or off. Whereas that compact or baler used to be turned on by the turn of a key to ignite the motor. Now the biometric is just a relay that sits in between the device and that switch. So people typically think of biometrics for access control, but it really is just a switch. Anytime you need to separate the user from something expensive or dangerous, a biometric is a perfectly suited device to accomplish that. Now, from a business perspective, any solution is so much easier to drive when you have a real return on investment associated with that. One application we didn't touch upon is time and attendance, where employees used to punch in for one another with punch cards. And I could say, hey, Rob, listen, I'm going to be an hour late tomorrow. Please punch me so I don't get doctor in trouble. So time and attendance was probably one of the most widely adopted applications using biometrics for many, many years. And most recently, Rob mentioned out that pharmaceutical devices can be protected with biometrics and trash compactors. But when you think about ROI, you have the savings of not having those OSHA fines, but also think of this: when you have garbage that could be recycled normally, and you've got your employees just throwing everything out there, that's actually money you're throwing out. Whereas if you've got a biometric device preventing those employees from throwing out recyclables, you can recapture that money. So for anyone on the phone is in the business of selling security and biometrics, always think of a return on investment. How are you possibly helping your clients save money or derive revenues by the use or adoption of the technology? And you'll have so much faster adoption. And biometrics now is becoming more and more prevalent in all these applications. As Rob pointed out, dozens and dozens and dozens, because a biometric is nothing other than just a switch. It's just a relay, on or off, separating the end user from whatever they're trying to gain access to, whether it's a motor or an elevator or a door or a trash compactor. So biometrics is simple, and now it's affordable. And many, many use cases that Rob and I can help clients who wish to call in and learn more about it.
Thanks, Larry. And now, boy, our time is just flying by, and I want to get to some of the questions that are coming in. We're getting a lot of questions, so thank you very much, attendees, for these. And actually, Larry, you mentioned it. There's a lot around time and attendance. So let me try and just roll some of this up into sort of one question. So enterprises are looking to time and attendance solutions to manage their workforces. What are the obstacles? What are the benefits? And you mentioned buddy punching. What are some of the other benefits on top of that? And then also can the time and attendance systems and the physical access systems get all rolled in together? So maybe Rob, could I ask you to please start off on this one? That's a lot of stuff, but if you could just start to talk generally about time and attendance solutions, please.
Okay, certainly. Larry made the comment about the history of biometrics and time and attendance, and I just would like to add to that. globally, it has been a marketplace that has consumed biometric-based technologies for time and attendance for many years in the enterprise, small, medium, and large companies. Like this has gone on for at least a decade. In fact, I actually would say that it's quite likely that up until now, the greatest application of the consumption of biometric technology globally is in fact time and attendance. And it's because the ROI is so strong and compelling. And so, as was discussed about buddy punching, so there's a real financial aspect to the labor cost for any enterprise when you can really start managing, real services that are being paid based on what your employees are actually performing. But you asked about other application areas. Another area actually is just compliance, labor compliance. What is often the case in depending on what state or province you're operating in, you have to be able to have a history of the relationship with that employee. If you ever face some type of litigation in the future or some type of an issue you have to resolve, you as an employer have got the responsibility to verify the complete work history of that person. So there's a labor compliance obligation and risk that exists. And this is just an extraordinary way of being able to address it. It also can work on the opposite side, which is the enterprise can actually manage the employee when they're working, but also there's a category called absence management, which they can also now manage when the employee is not working. So how do you integrate the relationship between when I'm working and when I'm taking time off, or how many days am I scheduled to take education in order to enhance my skills through the course of the year? So you can sort of almost get a full life cycle of that relationship between the employer and the employee, both when they're on premise and when they're not working. So I think from a market perspective, it's a tremendous opportunity area. There's certainly evolutions in the biometric-based solutions. There historically people have been concerned about it, but I think truthfully, when you've got now 650 million people worldwide used to using biometrics on their phone, I mean, it's getting to the point where there's not much left to talk about. I mean, everybody's now used to doing it, using and consuming biometrics. It just seems very logical that if this is probably the most convenient way and accurate way and transparent way of managing my time when I work as an employee inside of a company.
Good point, Max, and I call that the Apple effect. Larry, we are getting a lot of questions about the time and attendance area. So just to follow up on Rob's final comment there, do you find, there have been instances, few, but where workers protest against biometrics. Is that still happening? I don't think as much anymore. Are they controversial, or is it starting to move forward? And do you undertake education when you're putting these solutions into the market? Could you just talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Well, Peter, as Rob pointed out, the number one use of biometrics, because there's been such a strong ROI, is time and attendance. So no doubt employers recognize this and attempt adopting this. And then inevitably, there will be a very small minority of people that protest. And I'm not a Sigmund Freud, but after I just turned 50 just a few months ago, I've noticed that people who don't tend to trust others is normally because they themselves know that they are not to be trusted. And people who push back on biometrics typically have a personal agenda. If it's an integrator, it's because, frankly, they're not comfortable with the technology. They have to learn something new, and they're very, very comfortable resting on their laurels. And in the event of an employee, they simply don't want the employer knowing that they're late to work. Now, I've been a great employee my whole life. I smile in front of security cameras throughout my office because I maintain hours and I'm very productive. So I think employers now at this point are learning that don't pay so much attention to the squeaky wheel, because the vast majority of us want our coworkers to be held accountable. If I'm coming in on time every day and leaving on time every day, and there's one or two people who cheat, that's very disturbing to myself, and it could affect my morale and lower my productivity. But once all the employees, and typically most employees are very hardworking people, loyal to the employer, once they see that those other cheaters are now held accountable, it actually boosts morale.
You know what else, Larry? There, when I give a talk now, I always ask how many people have a biometric identifier on their phone. And in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, I asked this question to a fintech crowd, and there are probably 300 people in the room. Everybody raised their hand. So as Rob was saying, and Max as well, I mean, all of these people are using biometrics now. So then I asked the question, 2 years ago, was that the case? very few hands went up. So it's changed quite dramatically in that everybody now actually is using biometrics. So it's as Rob says, no big deal now. So I think that's also coming into the marketplace as well. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Sorry, Max, did you have one final thing to say?
One thing that you said before was this, and you talked about it again, referencing it, this idea that fintech, they're moving so fast, right? Yep. When you're talking about really software systems, right? And the ability to be flexible and responsive is much, much quicker. When you're talking about physical infrastructure, I think it's always much more complex to update the physical infrastructure. So I think that's part of the reason we've seen this lag. But I think, as Larry said, the customers are just demanding this now. I mean, it's going to change the dynamics completely.
Okay, well, thank you all for your comments. I would like to thank our sponsors again, BioConnect, ZKAccess for the continuing support, and especially to you, Max, for again your expert analysis. Please join us for our next webinar on May 25th. Voice biometrics in a hyper-connected world. Thank you all for attending. This concludes our webinar today.